Agenda item 5 was to discuss and take appropriate action on an update from the LA County Office of Inspector General on their investigation into the probation department's role in supervising the person on probation who is accused of murdering 2 El Monte police officers last year. That report has been published and attached to today's agenda. Both Eric Bates and, thank you, Shadi Cardin from the OIG are here to update us on this item. Given the pending litigation related to this incident, probation has been instructed not to present on this topic today. If you'd like to provide a public comment on this item, raise your hand on WebEx. If you're in the room, you can approach the front of the room to get online when the presentation ends. Eric, I'm passing it to you.
Thank you very much. And I know the commission has known about this report that we've been working on for quite some time regarding this tragic death of these 2 officers. And I have Ms. Cardin here because she was the author of it and did the research. And it's taken us this time to present it because of the just complexity of it. And we wanted to provide a comprehensive report. And as I'm sure you've all read, there were a number of deficiencies that we came across. So I will let Ms. Cardin delve into it. But I just wanted to say that was the delay in providing it, because we really wanted to make the report worth the tragic event that occurred.
Thank you, Mr. Bates. Good afternoon. I know it's been a very long day, so I will try my best to make this as brief and quick as possible. Obviously, there is a lot of details in the report that was published in August. I want to try to summarize it, if possible, as much as I can about the failures and the deficiencies in their policies. And then if anyone has any questions along the way, please feel free to ask me, and I will hopefully be able to answer it for you. As Mr. Bates pointed out, we started this review shortly after the 2 El Monte officers were shot and killed. We pulled and reviewed the probationary file of Mr. Flores, at which time we found multiple different failures on the part of the probation department in supervising Mr. Flores, as well as all the deficiencies within their own policies and procedures. Going through each of the failures and the deficiencies very quickly, I can tell you that from the very beginning of his supervision, there was a long delay in even setting up a supervision plan. After the fact that Mr. Flores was sentenced by the court in February, he was ordered, which is customary, to report to the probation department within 48 hours of sentencing. He actually did so. He contacted the probation department within 48 hours. However, the probation department was not ready to set up his supervision plan. They had information accessible to them through their adult probation system, in which they store a lot of basic information about them, since probation is responsible for putting together a pre-sentencing report for the court at the time that somebody is accused of a felony, which details their prior convictions, which details their history, if they are affiliated with a gang, if they have drug.
Can I stop? Sorry, I'm going to stop you for a second. Can you speak into the microphone?
Oh, is
sorry,
it not?
That might be it. Or no? Sorry, we've got someone just shared.
Oh, that you lost sound? Okay, it might be because I'm talking very fast too.
No. I think you have to talk like directly into the microphone.
All right, I will hold it. So there was a failure in actually establishing his supervision plan. Just to repeat myself in case anybody missed it, the court ordered for him to report within 48 hours. He did so. Probation was not prepared to do so, even though they had information about him ready to go. In fact, it took about 3 weeks until the probation department assigned a deputy probation officer to supervise Mr. Flores. And then it took another week, so almost over a month, until his orientation package was mailed out to him. So that was sort of one of the first things we noticed reviewing his file. Now, at the time that Mr. Flores was placed on probation, there was an emergency COVID response. And so a lot of the probation offices had been shut down and people were not reporting in person, which is obviously what they do. So the probation department created this new temporary policy, which allowed for what's called voice reporting. And by definition of their own policy, what voice reporting was to entail is that it would be a phone conversation where with the probation would have direct contact with the client, meaning there's a conversation, and they would discuss their case management, they would discuss, certain appointments, so on and so forth. Now, what we discovered after reviewing the file is that from the time that probation had been assigned Mr. Flores, there are certain notations within his file and inside of the adult probation system indicating several voice reporting dates. After sort of pulling everything, we realized these weren't actually real voice reportings. They were just maybe voice messages left or attempts that were made to make a phone call. So they were basically not being correctly indicated that there was actual direct contact with Mr. Flores at the time of his probation had begun. In fact, probably a little bit more disturbing is the fact that as we continue to pull his file, is that a true direct contact by definition of what a voice reporting is did not actually occur until over 6.5 months after he had been placed on probation. Digging even further, probation department, in order to sort of assess and classify a probationer after they've been sentenced, does what we call a DRAD. A DRAD is short for Defendant Risk Assessment Data Assessment. So what it really is a assessment of their risk level. There's kind of a score sheet that's created, has about 8 different factors on their score sheet where the investigative probation officer, who's usually the person who's handling the individual in court, takes a bunch of different, information about the individual and scores them to be able to classify their risk level. Either they are low risk to the community and to others, or they're medium risk, or they're high risk. And these things include such things as their prior record, their history on probation, maybe if there's a drug or alcohol abuse, or if there's a gang affiliation, so on and so forth. So what's interesting about Mr. Flores is that he, during his investigation in his DRAD report score, was determined to be a medium risk. And what's interesting about that, there are multiple things that are interesting about it, is that, first of all, multiple things were not including in that score sheet, including his gang affiliation. Also, his current offense was not reviewed. And so when I started digging deeper into it and asking probation, all right, can you give me a little bit more information about which DRAD score report was used for this? I received 3 different versions of a DRAD score report, which were all very inconsistent as to how the scores were going to be accumulated. And ultimately, I think at some point during our review, there was a 4th one that was presented to us as well. So there was just a complete inconsistency on how these assessments are being made. So regardless, he was at that time determined to be a medium risk, and he continued to not report. Then what we also discovered is that even when the court actually, even when the, excuse me, just one second. Even when the offices started to reopen, which was in October, the only time he actually appeared, can you still hear me? The only time he actually appeared was in December. That was one time they had physical contact with him. And at that time, the additional required assessments were also not done. Probation, as a way of rehabilitating the individual that's on probation to help them get back into the community, does this other assessment. It's called an LS/CMI, which I don't recall right now what that stands for, but I know the purpose of it is to be able to assess the individual and determine whether certain programs should be provided for them so that we can lower their risk of reentry into the criminal justice system. That is supposed to be done within 60 days of them being sentenced to probation. And again, a second time in 6 months, neither of those things were done. Even at the time that the offices were reopened, even at the time that he appeared in person in December, none of those efforts were made. Now, what we continue to then dig even deeper is the fact that there was ample opportunity to violate Mr. Flores in the 16 months that he was on probation. Besides the fact that he was not either truly voice reporting, nor was he showing up for his actual in-person meetings. On June 15th, we learned after review that SEO, which is I can't, yeah, this, I know, I was getting all of them. Okay, so the SEO, the Special Enforcement Operation of the Probation Department, has a component of their actual part called Disarm, which was created back in, I think, 2000 by one of the supervisors. And the purpose of it was for them to be able to do unannounced visits and unannounced checks on the field of individuals that they think are high risk to the community. And so Mr. Flores was actually identified by the Disarm unit of SEO as being a high-risk probationer because of his gang affiliation and because of the fact that he had been convicted of the current crime of being a felon with a firearm. So, just right there, complete disconnect between, the initial assessment of being high risk, the initial, this other part of the department making him high risk. And on June 15th, several months after he was on probation, the Disarm unit goes to the address in which he had indicated he was living with his family. They find that he's not there. His family explains that he had packed some of his stuff. They left. Nobody really knows where he is. SEO comes back. They make the note about this in the APS. They notify his probation officer to let him know. No actions taken. At this point, it's now, I think, about 3 months since the time that he had been sentenced to probation, and probation makes no effort to file any type of violation on him to even explain. And when you look at the APS printout, you see that it just keeps saying that there's voice reporting, voice reporting, voice reporting, which is obviously not accurate. We then further learned that on August 1st, there was a notation in the file that said that there was a desertion report filed on Mr. Flores. What that means is that, probation had recognized that he's not reporting, therefore we're going to file this particular violation with the court. However, that actual report is non-existent in his file. It was never followed through. And when we spoke to probation about it, they informed us that they had attempted to file it, but then withdrew it because he had called in, and there was just a lot of inconsistencies. Needless to say, no actions were actually taken. And what became even more concerning is that if a desertion report and a violation report is to be filed, there are several steps the probation department has to take. And one of them, which would seem like common sense, is to check his warrants and check his record to see, well, if he's MIA, maybe he's in custody somewhere else. And we know for a fact that that was not done. And we know that because when we looked at his record, we saw that he had 3 outstanding warrants for him that dated back before he even was sentenced, which means even at the time of sentencing, probation did not check his warrants. So he had 3 outstanding warrants pending for him since 2020. 2 of them were out of San Bernardino and another one out of Los Angeles County in 2021. So desertion report was not filed. 6.5 months go by before the first phone call is actually made. Still, no action is taken at all. He finally appeals in person in December at the end of 2021. 2021. Again, his assessments were not done. Drug testing was not done, which was ordered by the court for him to have periodic drug testing. None of it was done. Another notation is in his file that another desertion report was attempted to be filed in March of 2022. And again, same thing. No warrant checks were done then. No actual physical report of the desertion was in there. We were told again that it was attempted to be filed, but it was withdrawn for some reason. So moving on to sort of the final hours, so to speak, before the shooting occurs, there's sort of a what I would refer to as an escalated levels of violations that are still not being paid attention to. On June 2nd of 2022, the mother of Mr. Flores' girlfriend calls his probation officer and says that Mr. Flores is severely hurting her daughter, that there is severe domestic violence that's occurring, that she's very concerned because Mr. Flores has a gun and that he is on drugs, specifically PCP. The probation officer then makes this notation very briefly in the APS, sends out an email to another probation officer, and I believe at the time to a supervisor. So at least 2 other people in the department were made aware. Nothing is done. The only thing that the probation officer tells Mr. Flores' girlfriend's mother is to report this incident or any type of incident to local law enforcement, which she does. We find out that a report was made to the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department several days later, in which the girlfriend gives very detailed information about the abuse that she was enduring from Mr. Flores. However, she doesn't add in there that there was a gun. It looks like, on review, that it's just very much focused on sort of what she had experienced with him in detail. So then after the report has been filed, the mother calls the probation department again on June 6th, at which time she says, I have reported this. There was a police report. Probation then tells her, okay, I will pull the report. The report was not pulled. We independently pulled it ourselves through the Sheriff's Department. It was not part of the file. So on June 6th, what's interesting is that probation then decides to really file a desertion report. And we know this because then a warrant check is done at that point, and those 3 warrants that I was talking about show up that are dated, 2 of them are over 2 years old at that point, and another one is over 1 year old. And instead of referring to these sort of egregious things that have been occurring with the girlfriend and the drugs and the gun, the desertion report that's then filed on June 6th only refers to those 3 warrants that have been outstanding. That's all that it says in there. Then on June 7th, the next day, Mr. Flores' own mother calls the probation department very concerned, saying that my son has been fighting with my other son. He has a gun. He is on PCP. I'm very concerned. No actions are taken. As we continue to read this file, even though multiple people knew about what was happening and they were continuously notified, local law enforcement was not made aware of any of this. There was a complete disconnect between everybody in each level as to what was happening. And it was a mess. So I try to summarize and be brief, so I apologize, but there's just a lot of information and a lot of different details, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have, if you have any.
Just processing over here, but I'm gonna make space for public comment. If there are folks in the audience who'd like to give public comment, please do so. And if you're online, please raise your hand to give public comment. Again, it will be limited to 1 minute because of the time.
Thank you for that presentation. I don't see anyone in the room. Do we have anyone online? Okay, great. Okay, Crystal, we're going to begin with you.
Crystal Jones for Crystal Clear Learning Foundation advocate. I want to say thank you to Ms. Sade. I'm saying her name, current overview of what's happening. I want to say my deepest concern is for the mother, as a mother myself and a leader, the concern of reaching out to the community agency for actual resources and help and to advocate the urgency of the needs for my child and not receive the help I need. not only lives anymore, but to help impact the other youth lives whose lives are at stake today. For the need of mothers to want to help their child and also help them themselves and other siblings that might be in the household and could fall victim of circumstance because of having the lack of help. The urgency to be accountable and for you guys to understand we look up to you for accountability, trust, safety, resources, and real leadership that understands the needs. Provide resources. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Crystal, for joining us. Next up, Thomas. Thomas, we're going to open your mic. Thomas, we could hear you. Oh, yeah, now we can. You can begin.
All right. I just had a question. When the IOG was doing their research, did they see if the officer was deployed? Or if he wasn't deployed, was he taking up the backlog from officers who were deployed at the time? Or what else was going on? Because all I'm hearing is what they didn't do, or probation failed this, probation failed that. But with all that's going on in this department, what happened besides them failing? What caused it to fail? Because no one is just going to not do their job. No one is just not going to let somebody slide and let things get away. Was he deployed? Was he in the halls when he should have been in his office? Like we've been making for a while. That's happening. You know, and now something happens, you blame the officer instead of what's going on actually in the department. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Any other comments? Did you want to address that question, Derek?
Just as a point of clarification, this incident occurred before any redeployment of staff from the field. So this has nothing to do with the current situation of staff being redeployed into the facilities and the possible issues of them not being able to carry on their in-office duties. So this was completely separate.
Okay, so that's the end of public comment. I'm just going to take the liberty to say that while I know that many, many months have passed since this happened, I'm sure it feels like yesterday for the families of the two officers involved. So I'd just like to take a minute to think about their loss, and I'll turn it over.
Thank you for lifting that up. I'll pass it to the commissioners if there are any comments or questions,
Well, first
concerns.
of all, thank you, Wendy, for taking that time to say that. My heart goes out. And I'm going to say something that's going to make me less popular with probation, but I'm not surprised. This oversight commission is here because not all, but there are a lot of people that work for probation that don't really take the job seriously. And I hope for those that do the work, that come every day, they understand that by allowing other people not to do the work, it hurts us all. It's disappointing and it's heartbreaking. I have two cousins that work for El Monte PD. And so I know how it affected them. I only have one question because I'm sure that if they were notified, we would have more public comment today. Was any of the El Monte family notified that this was on the agenda?
No, we didn't specifically send out any invitations.
Yeah, I think it would have been nice had we just called the El Monte PD and let them know so they could have at least had the opportunity to listen in to an amazing report, sadly. But it would have been nice.
Well, I agree. There is something I think we can do now. You know, Ismail does an incredible job of getting these videos out very quickly, so we can certainly send them a copy of their report in terms of a link. I mean, they have a copy of OIG's report, which is available publicly, but send them a copy of the the video of this and invite them to comment if they wish, so that you all can hear at least after the fact.
That's what I was thinking with written comment. Thank you.
Commissioner Garcia Leyes, any comments or questions?
I wish we had an hour to talk about this. I have a
Yeah.
lot to say. Because this is a case that gets to the heart of so much of the most difficult aspects of probation and criminal justice reform and policing. I mean, Mr. Flores reminds me so much in the first couple pages of my clients, right? I suspect probably a former and long inactive gang member, gun possession charge, right? I mean, this not good at returning phone calls. This is exactly, at that point, the person in my mind who I would like to see probation treat with a soft touch. But by the end of this report, his mom saying he's pulled a gun on his brother, he's smoking PCP, he's domestic violence. At that point, he's somebody I absolutely want to see violated. And the steps in between are complicated and full of gray areas. So I appreciate that the report details all of that. And I want to consider Officer Bell's comments too, that there's a lot more that can't be put in this report or isn't in this report. And I think, right, if this put on blast individual probation officers, that would probably be inappropriate and probably a violation of the Police Officers' Bill of Rights. So we're just going to have to guess, I think, as to what was going on with each, at least the public is left just guessing as to what was going on with the specific probation officers and why they didn't apparently do all of their duties. So I just want to take the time to say that. I don't really have any questions because I think all the questions that I'm left with are questions you can't answer. Not the least of which is, would this tragedy have been prevented were it not for these failures? But I don't expect you to be able to answer that question, so I'll just put that out there. Thank you.
Yeah, the report was very detailed, and, with every time you said about another email or phone call, it was just like all those times that it could have been prevented. And then even when it came down to his own family, so, I mean, what do you say? Thank you for this detailed report with the tragedy that occurred. It's kind of, morbid, but I just, I hope that, all the families involved, it's a lot. It should have never have happened. And then this also for me as a commissioner, that's what I mean. This is so hard because on the one hand, you're like, oh, probation comes down too hard and they get harassed. And then on this hand, you're like, they did absolutely nothing. There's outrage. And so like, where do you draw the line? Where do you find the solutions through all this? So these things do not continue to happen, right? On all levels. And so anyways, I just wanted to say a few words for all involved.
Thank you so much for all of the time and energy that you put into this. And yes, so many apologies, which feels like such a insufficient response, not just to the officers, not even just to Mr. Flores, who was failed by the system really repeatedly, and to all of the family members who reached out for help and who also lost people that they love and cared for, however complicated that may have been. In reading this report and hearing your presentation, it's hard to not be left with like, was this just an anomaly, or is this how the system functions? I think I certainly have my biases, as most folks know, that this is symbolic of kind of how the system generally functions, having been a public defender and having seen, to Mr. Garcia Leyes' point, or to Commissioner Garcia Leyes' point. I don't know if you're able to speak to this, but like, are there next steps? Is it just, here's the report and we're done? Is there a deeper investigation into?
I mean, if you At the end of our report, we make a lot of recommendations and, we will follow up to see, we have been sort of checking in to see about these different systems in place and this complete disconnect into being able to monitor and supervise people on probation. I mean, yes, it's a very complex situation. There's so many different players. So we are, looking at it. I mean, I don't think we'll be doing any further investigations on this case, obviously specifically, but as far as a systemic issue, absolutely. I mean, that's part of our responsibilities and we're definitely going to be looking into that.